beam of my flashlight flickered, then died, plunging me into absolute darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled to replace the batteries, but my trembling fingers dropped them into the leaf litter at my feet. That's when I heard the footsteps. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The day had started perfectly. Crisp autumn air, clear skies, and the promise of adventure. I'd been planning this solo hike for months, eager to challenge myself and soak in the solitude of the forest. The Piney Ridge Trail was supposed to be a moderately difficult 15-mile loop, nothing I couldn't handle in a day. I set out at dawn, my backpack loaded with supplies, and a topo map I'd studied religiously. The morning passed in a blur of golden sunlight filtering through rust-colored leaves, the crunch of acorns underfoot, and the occasional chatter of squirrels. I stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook, savoring a peanut butter sandwich as I gazed out over miles of undulating forest canopy. It was mid-afternoon when things started to go wrong. The trail narrowed, becoming overgrown in places. I found myself pushing through thick underbrush, the thorns catching on my clothes. Checking my map, I realized I must have missed a turn somewhere. No problem, I thought. I'll just backtrack to the last clear marker. But backtracking proved futile. Nothing looked familiar. The trees all blurred together, a maze of bark and branches. I tried to orient myself using the sun, but the thick canopy obscured most of the sky. A tendril of panic began to curl in my stomach. Keep it together, I told myself. You've got supplies. You've got a whistle. Worst case, you spend a night in the woods and get your bearings in the morning. I took a deep breath and picked a direction, hoping to stumble across a trail or landmark. Hours passed. My water supply dwindled. The forest grew dim as sunset approached, the shadows lengthening ominously. I hadn't seen a trail blaze or any sign of human presence in what felt like an eternity. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. As darkness fell, the forest transformed. Familiar shapes became monstrous and threatening. Every shadow seemed to move. Branches reached out like gnarled fingers, snagging my clothes and hair. I stumbled more frequently, my legs leaden with exhaustion. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. The narrow circle of light was both a comfort and a curse. It allowed me to pick my way forward. But it also emphasized just how dark and vast the surrounding forest had become. My world had shrunk to that small illuminated patch. A twig snapped loudly somewhere to my left. I swung the flashlight wildly, heart pounding. Nothing, just trees and more trees. Get a grip, I chided myself. It's probably just a deer. Or a raccoon. Nothing to be afraid of, but the sounds continued. Rustling, the soft thud of footfalls on damp earth. Always just at the edge of my light. Always moving. I picked up my pace, no longer caring about finding a trail, just wanting to put distance between myself and whatever was out there. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, the flashlight flying from my hand. I heard it clatter against a rock, then silence. Panic clawed at my throat as I scrambled in the dirt, fingers searching desperately for the light. When I finally grasped it and clicked the switch, nothing happened. No. I shook the flashlight violently, as if that would magically fix it. The reality of my situation came crashing down. I was alone in the pitch-black forest, hopelessly lost, with no light source. My breathing came in short, sharp gasps. Focus. You need to change the batteries. I steadied myself against a tree trunk and felt for the flashlight's battery compartment with shaking hands. The cap came off easily enough, but as I tried to extract the dead batteries, my fingers slipped. I heard the soft thud as they fell into the leaves at my feet. Shit, I hissed, dropping to my knees. I felt around blindly, praying I'd get lucky. How far could they have rolled? But the forest floor was a mess of twigs, leaves, and who knows what else. It was hopeless. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Clear, deliberate footsteps crunching through the leaf litter. Close. Too close. And getting closer, I froze, barely daring to breathe. My mind raced through possibilities. A fellow hiker? But who would be out here in the dark? A ranger? But why wouldn't they call out? A bear? No! The gate sounded bipedal, human. The footsteps paused. I could hear breathing now, low and raspy. It was maybe 10 feet away, 15 at most. My muscles tensed, ready to bolt. But I knew running blindly through the forest at night would be suicide. HLO, I managed to croak out. My voice sounded pathetically small in the vast darkness. Is someone there? I'm lost. I need help. No response. Just that raspy breathing. A twig snapped, closer this time. Whatever it was moving again. Towards me. Panic overrode reason. I scrambled to my feet and ran. Branches whipped at my face. I tripped and stumbled over unseen obstacles. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because the footsteps behind me had broken into a run as well. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they would give out at any moment. Still, the pursuer kept pace. Sometimes it seemed to fall behind, only to surge closer moments later. Was it toying with me? My foot caught on something, a root, a rock, I'll never know, and I went down hard. My head cracked against something solid, and for a moment, the darkness was replaced by a burst of stars. I lay there, dazed, the taste of blood in my mouth. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. It was right there. I could hear its labored breathing, could almost feel its presence looming over me. I curled into a ball, eyes clenched shut, waiting for, I don't know what, attack? Death? A hand grabbed my shoulder. I screamed, "Easy there, son. You're all right now." The gruff voice cut through my terror. A light flicked on, momentarily blinding me. I squinted up to see a bearded face peering down at me. The man wore a park ranger uniform. "Looks like you took quite a tumble," he said, helping me to my feet. "You're lucky I found you. These woods aren't safe at night." Relief flooded through me, making my knees weak. "Thank God," I breathed. I don't know what I thought. Something was chasing me. The ranger's brow furrowed. "Chasing you?" I didn't see any signs of wildlife. "Are you sure you weren't just spooked by the dark?" I started to protest, then stopped. Now, in the warm glow of the ranger's powerful flashlight, my panic seemed almost silly. Had I imagined it all? Maybe, I admitted. I've been lost for hours. I guess I let my imagination run wild. The ranger nodded sympathetically. "Happens to the best of us. The mind can play tricks out here. Let's get you back to the station and check out that cut on your head." As we hiked back, the ranger explained how they'd started searching after my car was still in the trailhead parking lot at sunset. The forest slowly began to feel normal again. Safe, even. My wild flight through the darkness seemed like a bad dream. But as we neared the edge of the woods, I glanced back one last time. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw a shadowy figure standing between two distant trees, watching us. I blinked, and it was gone. Just another trick of the mind. I told myself firmly. Had to be. Weeks later, the memory of that night still haunts me. I've tried to convince myself it was all in my head. The footsteps, the breathing, the sense of being pursued. Just panic and exhaustion playing tricks on me. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I'm back there in that pitch-black forest, and I hear those footsteps approaching, and I'm not so sure. I haven't been hiking since. The low, guttural growl froze us in our tracks. Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness, her grip painfully tight. We'd come to these woods for an adventure, but not this kind. Not the kind where you realize you're no longer the top of the food chain. It had started as the perfect getaway. Sarah and I had been best friends since college, but life, jobs, relationships, responsibilities had pulled us in different directions. This camping trip was our chance to reconnect, to recapture that carefree spirit of our younger days. We had chosen a remote spot in the Cascade Mountains, far from the well-trodden tourist paths. The hike had been challenging but exhilarating. 5 miles of switchbacks and steep climbs rewarded us with a pristine alpine meadow, ringed by towering pines and backed by snow-capped peaks. "This is it," Sarah had declared, dropping her pack and spreading her arms wide. "Our own little slice of paradise." I had to agree. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in a golden glow. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and a clear stream burbled nearby. We set up camp with the easy rhythm of long-time friends, our tent a bright blue against the vast green landscape. As dusk approached, we gathered firewood and prepared dinner. The freeze-dried camping meals were a far cry from gourmet, but everything tastes better in the wilderness. We laughed over shared memories and swapped stories of our lives since we'd last seen each other. "Remember that time we tried to sneak into that club with fake IDs?" Sarah chuckled, poking at the fire with a stick. I groaned. "God, we were so obvious. I still can't believe they let us in. We were unstoppable back then," she said, a wistful note in her voice. Nothing could touch us. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. We fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The day's exertion caught up with me, and I felt my eyelids growing heavy. "We should probably turn in," I said, stifling a yawn. "Big day of hiking tomorrow." Sarah nodded, stretching. "Yeah, you're right. Let's make sure the food's secure first." We gathered our supplies, trail mix energy bars, the remains of our dinner, and stuffed everything into our bear canister. It was a routine precaution, one we'd taken on countless camping trips before. We secured the canister to a tree about 100 yards from our campsite, well out of reach of any curious critters. "Good night, forest," Sarah called out dramatically as we zipped ourselves into the tent. "Don't let the bears bite." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. Same old Sarah. Sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless. I'm not sure what woke me at first. A sound? A change in the air? My eyes snapped open, instantly alert. The pre-dawn light filtered weakly through the tent fabric, casting everything in a gray haze. Something was wrong. I nudged Sarah, who mumbled and tried to burrow deeper into her sleeping bag. "Sarah," I whispered urgently, "wake up." She must have heard the tension in my voice because she was immediately awake, propping herself up on one elbow. "What is it?" she asked, voice thick with sleep. "I don't know," I admitted, "but something's not right." We listened intently. The forest was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals. Just an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. Then we heard it, a loud crash, followed by the sound of tearing fabric. It was coming from the direction of our food cache. "Oh no," Sarah breathed. We scrambled out of the tent, bare feet cold against the dewdam grass. In the dim light, I could make out a dark shape by the trees where we'd left our supplies. It was massive, far larger than I'd imagined. A bear, and it had gotten into our food. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, clutching my arm. I racked my brain, trying to remember everything I'd ever read about bear encounters. "We need to make noise," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let it know we're here. Maybe it'll leave." We began clapping our hands, shouting as loudly as we dared. "Hey, bear, go away." The shape at the tree line stopped moving. Slowly, it turned towards us. My breath caught in my throat. Even from this distance, I could see how truly enormous it was. This was no curious black bear looking for an easy meal. This was something much, much bigger. "Is that a grizzly?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Grizzlies weren't common in this part of the Cascades, but they weren't unheard of either. And we had just woken up one of the most powerful predators on the continent. The bear dropped to all fours, and for a moment I dared to hope it would lumber off into the woods. Instead, it began walking towards us with deliberate, heavy steps. "Back up," I said, grabbing Sarah's hand. "Slowly. Don't run." We retreated, step by agonizing step, towards the opposite tree line. The bear followed, matching our pace. My mind raced. We couldn't outrun it. We couldn't fight it. Our only hope was to find shelter, to put something solid between us and those massive claws. "The stream," Sarah hissed. There were some big boulders. I nodded, remembering the rock formation we'd passed on our hike in. It wasn't far, maybe a quarter-mile downstream. If we could reach it, a low, rumbling growl stopped us cold. The bear was closer now, close enough that I could see the steam of its breath in the cool morning air. Its eyes, small and dark, were fixed on us with terrifying intelligence. That's when I saw them, massive paw prints in the soft earth, leading right up to our tent. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The bear hadn't just found our food cache. It had been investigating our entire campsite while we slept, totally unaware. "Sarah," I whispered, my mouth dry. "When I say run, we run." "Okay." I felt her nod beside me. The bear took another step forward, its growl deepening. "Run." We bolted. Everything became a blur of motion and fear. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me with every step. But the sound of crashing undergrowth behind us kept me moving, kept me from even thinking about slowing down. The roar that echoed through the trees was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It vibrated in my chest, primal and terrifying. Sarah stumbled beside me, and I hauled her back to her feet without breaking stride. I caught glimpses of the stream through the trees. We were close, so close, but the bear was gaining on us. I could hear its labored breathing, the heavy thud of its paws. "There!" Sarah gasped, pointing. The boulders loomed ahead, a jumbled pile of granite worn smooth by centuries of alpine storms. We scrambled up the nearest one, its surface cool and rough beneath our hands. Higher and higher we climbed, not daring to look back. Only when we reached the top did I finally turn. The bear stood at the base of the rocks, rearing up on its hind legs. It was even more massive than I thought, easily 8 feet tall. It slammed its paws against the boulder, but couldn't find purchase on the smooth stone. We huddled together on our granite island, hearts pounding. The bear circled below, occasionally standing to test the rocks again. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, baking the stone beneath us. We had no food, no water, and no way to call for help. "What are we going to do?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse. I shook my head, at a loss. We couldn't stay here forever, but as long as the bear remained, we couldn't leave either. We were trapped. As if reading my thoughts, the bear let out another earth-shaking roar. A challenge, a promise. The day stretched on, the sun arcing across the sky. The bear's attempts to reach us grew less frequent, but it showed no signs of leaving. It had claimed the territory around the boulders as its own, and we were unwelcome intruders. Dehydration and sunburn set in. We took turns watching while the other tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. Every sound, every movement below sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through my system. As dusk approached, a new fear gripped me. What if the bear could climb in the dark? What if it got bold enough to make a real attempt? We were exhausted, weakened. We wouldn't stand a chance. The first stars were just becoming visible when we heard it. A rhythmic thumping sound, growing louder. Sarah and I looked at each other, hardly daring to hope. A helicopter crested the nearby ridge, its searchlight cutting through the gathering darkness. The bear, startled by the noise and light, finally turned and lumbered into the forest. We waved and shouted, our voices cracking with relief. As the helicopter touched down in the meadow, as park rangers rushed towards us with water and blankets, the reality of our ordeal began to sink in. We had come to the wilderness, seeking adventure, a break from our everyday lives. We had found something else entirely, a reminder of nature's raw power and our own fragility in the face of it. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying us back to safety, I caught one last glimpse of our campsite far below. A tiny blue dot in a vast green wilderness. A wilderness that would never again seem quite so welcoming. The snap of a twig shattered the forest silence. I froze, my hand instinctively tightening on the grip of my service pistol. Slowly, I turned towards the sound, my heart pounding in my ears. That's when I saw it. The cold glint of a rifle barrel emerging from the undergrowth, aimed directly at me. I'd been a park ranger for 15 years, but nothing in my training had prepared me for this moment. The day had started like any other. A routine patrol to investigate reports of illegal poaching in the northern sector of Whispering Pines National Forest. It was a task I performed countless times before, usually resulting in nothing more than a few warnings issued to overzealous hunters who had strayed beyond the designated areas. The crisp autumn air nipped at my cheeks as I guided my patrol vehicle along the winding forest road. Leaves of gold and crimson create a vibrant canopy overhead, occasionally breaking to reveal glimpses of a clear blue sky. It was the kind of day that reminded me why I'd chosen this career, why I'd dedicated my life to protecting these wild spaces. I parked at the trailhead and shouldered my pack, double-checking that I had all the necessary equipment: first aid kit, radio, GPS unit, and of course my sidearm. The weight of the pistol on my hip was a constant reminder of the potential dangers of the job, though I'd rarely had cause to draw it. The trail wound deeper into the forest, the sounds of civilization fading with each step. I kept my senses alert, scanning for any signs of illegal activity. Spent shell casings, disturbed undergrowth with a telltale scent of gunpowder lingering in the air. 3 hours into my patrol, I stumbled upon the first concrete evidence that something was amiss. A flash of unnatural color caught my eye, a length of bright orange cord tied around a tree trunk. Following the markings, I discovered more. Ribbons tied at regular intervals, creating a clear path through the dense forest. My pulse quickened. This was no casual hunter who had wandered off course. This was organized, deliberate. I radioed in my position and findings to dispatch, then continued to follow the trail, moving with increased caution. The marked path led me to a small clearing. What I saw there made my blood run cold. A crude camp had been set up, tarpaulin strung between trees, a fire pit still smoldering. But it was what hung from the branches that truly horrified me. Animal carcasses, deer, elk, even a bear, stripped of their most valuable parts. Antlers, pelts, and gallbladders dangled like macabre ornaments. This was far beyond simple poaching. This was wholesale slaughter for the black market. My hand went to my radio, ready to call for immediate backup. That's when I heard it, the snap of a twig behind me. I spun around, coming face to face with the barrel of a high-powered hunting rifle. The man holding it wore camouflage, his face smeared with mud and leaves for concealment. His eyes were cold, calculating. Well, he drawled, a humorless smile playing at his lips. Looks like we caught ourselves a ranger. 2 more men emerged from the underbrush, flanking me. They were similarly armed and dressed. I raised my hand slowly, mind racing. 3 against 1, and they had the drop on me. This was bad. Gentlemen, I said, striving to keep my voice steady. I think we all know the situation doesn't end well for anyone. Why don't we talk about this? The leader, I assumed he was a leader based on how the others deferred to him, chuckled darkly. Oh, we're long past talking, Ranger. You've seen too much. My heart sank. These men had no intention of being taken in. They'd killed before, animals, certainly, but the cold look in their eyes told me they wouldn't hesitate to add a human to their list. You don't want to do this, I said, taking a small step back. Killing a federal officer? That's a whole different level of trouble. And who's going to know? One of the other men sneered. Accidents happen in the woods all the time. Maybe you fell. Maybe you got mauled by that bear we took down. Lots of ways for a body to disappear out here. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my spine despite the cool air. They were right. It could be days before anyone found me out here. My hand inched towards my holster, but the leader noticed a movement. He said, gesturing with his rifle. Nice and easy now. Toss that pea shooter over here. Reluctantly, I unholstered my pistol and tossed it towards him. One of the other men scooped it up, checking the magazine with practiced ease. Now then, the leader continued, here's what's going to happen. You're going to radio your people. Tell them everything's fine, that you're heading back. Then you're going to come with us. We've got a nice, deep hole all picked out for you. My mind raced, searching for a way out. I couldn't overpower them, couldn't outrun them. My only hope was to buy time, to somehow alert my colleagues to the danger. Look, I said, an idea forming. You guys are clearly professionals. This operation you've got going, it's impressive. Why waste your talents on small game like this? The men exchanged glances, a flicker of interest in their eyes. What are you getting at, Ranger? The leader asked, suspicion clear in his voice. I took a deep breath, praying this gamble would pay off. I've been a ranger for 15 years. I know these woods better than anyone. I know where the real prizes are, the old growth stands, the secret valleys where the biggest game hide. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did know the forest intimately, including areas that were off limits to the public, areas that would be a poacher's dream. You expect us to believe you'd help us, one of the men scoffed. I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite my racing heart. I'm not an idiot. I know my options here are limited, but if I'm going to die anyway, why not go out with one last big score? Hell, maybe you'll even cut me in on the profits. The leader studied me intently, clearly weighing his options. I held my breath, praying he'd take the bait. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. All right, Ranger, you've piqued my interest, but one wrong move, one hint that you're playing us, and you'll wish we'd just shot you outright. Understood. I nodded, relief flooding through me. It wasn't much, but it was a chance to stay alive, to potentially lead them into an area where I'd have the advantage. First things first, I said, gesturing to my radio. I need to check in, or they'll send someone looking for me. The leader nodded, but kept his rifle trained on me as I slowly reached for my radio. Dispatch, this is Ranger Cooper, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Just checking in. All clear in Sector 7. I'm going to extend my patrol a bit. Check out some areas further north. Probably won't have radio contact for a while. I held my breath, hoping against hope that dispatch would pick up on the subtle distress signal. Sector 7 was our code for a situation gone critically wrong. Copy that. Ranger Cooper, came the crackled reply. Stay safe out there. I couldn't be sure if they'd understood, but it was the best I could do under the circumstances. All right, the leader said, gesturing with his rifle. Lead on, Ranger. And remember, one false move, and you're done. As I began to lead them deeper into the forest, my mind raced. I had bought myself some time, but I was far from safe. These men were dangerous, desperate, and now I was alone with them in the vast wilderness. The weight of my decision pressed down on me with each step. Had I made the right choice? Should I have tried to fight, to run? But deep down, I knew this was my only real chance at survival. The forest stretched out before us, wild and unpredictable, just like the situation I now found myself in. All I could do was stay alert, look for any opportunity, and hope that help would come before it was too late. As we pushed deeper into the untamed wilderness, I realized that the true test of my skills as a ranger was just beginning. It wasn't just about protecting the forest anymore. It was about surviving it. The face in the final photo was so close I could count the pores on its skin. Eyes wild, mouth contorted in a silent scream. It stared back at me from my camera's display. I dropped the device, my hands shaking uncontrollably, because I knew with absolute certainty that I had been alone on that cliff when I took those sunset shots. It had started as a typical day in my life as a nature photographer. The alarm blared at an ungodly hour, rousing me from a fitful sleep in my cramped camper van. I silenced it quickly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful quiet of the forest campground. The pre-dawn chill nipped at my skin as I crawled out of my sleeping bag, but the promise of the perfect shot was more than enough motivation to get moving. I had been tracking the weather patterns for weeks, waiting for this exact combination of conditions. A high-pressure system was moving in, promising clear skies after days of rain. The moisture in the air would create the perfect canvas for a spectacular sunset, and I was determined to capture it from the summit of Eagles Peak. As I brewed my coffee on the little camp stove, I ran through my mental checklist. Cameras? Check. Extra batteries and memory cards? Check. Water? Snacks? First aid kit? All accounted for. I had done this countless times before, but I never let myself get complacent. The wilderness demanded respect, and I had seen too many cocky amateurs get themselves into trouble. The hike up Eagles Peak was grueling, especially with all my gear. The trail switched back relentlessly, gaining over 3,000 feet of elevation in just under 5 miles. But with each step, the views became more breathtaking. The forest canopy opened up, revealing glimpses of the valley below and the distant, snow-capped peaks beyond. By mid-afternoon, I reached the summit. A wave of satisfaction washed over me as I took in the 360-degree panorama. To the west, the sun was beginning its slow descent towards the horizon. The sky was already starting to take on a soft, golden hue. I knew I had made the right call. This was going to be a sunset for the ages. I set up my equipment with practiced efficiency. 2 DSLR cameras on tripods, one for wide-angle shots and one for telephotos. A mirrorless camera around my neck for quick, handheld shots. I double-checked all my settings, ensuring everything was dialed in perfectly. As the sun dipped lower, the show began in earnest. The sky erupted in a riot of colors, deep purples, fiery oranges, and brilliant pinks. Wispy clouds caught the light, glowing like embers. I worked feverishly, changing lenses, adjusting compositions, firing off shot after shot. In moments like these, I felt truly alive, connected to something greater than myself. The light was fading fast now, the sun a sliver on the horizon. I switched to my telephoto lens, zooming in tight on that last flare of daylight. Through the viewfinder, I watched as the sun finally slipped away, leaving behind a deep indigo sky pierced by the first evening stars. Exhilarated and slightly out of breath, I lowered my camera. The twilight was deepening rapidly now, the forest below fading into shadowy darkness. A cool breeze kicked up, carrying with it the earthy scent of pine and moss. I shivered, suddenly aware of how alone I was up here. I began packing up my gear, eager to start the long hike down before it got too dark. That's when I noticed something odd about my surroundings. The wind had picked up, whispering through the stunted trees that clung to life at this elevation. But beneath that familiar sound was something else, a low, rhythmic noise that I couldn't quite place. Pausing in my work, I strained my ears. It almost sounded like breathing, heavy, labored breathing, as if something large was exerting itself nearby. A bear, maybe? But I hadn't seen any signs of large wildlife on my hike up. I scanned the deepening shadows, my heart rate picking up. The rational part of my brain told me I was being silly, letting the isolation get to me. But some primal instinct was screaming that something was very, very wrong. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement just at the edge of my peripheral vision. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there. Just trees and rocks, their shapes distorted in the fading light. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the vast emptiness. No response, save for the echo of my own words bouncing back at me from distant cliffs. My hand shook slightly as I finished packing my bag. I needed to get off this mountain and fast. I slung my heavy pack onto my shoulders and clicked on my headlamp. Its beam cut through the gathering darkness, creating more shadows than it dispelled. I was about to start down the trail when a sudden urge struck me. I had to check the photos. I'm not sure why it felt so urgent, but some instinct told me I needed to look at them right now. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my main camera and switched it on. The display flickered to life, illuminating my face with its pale glow. I navigated to the most recent shots and began to scroll through them. The first few were exactly what I expected: glorious sunset scenes, each one a potential magazine cover. But as I flicked through them, something began to change. In the background of one shot, barely noticeable, was a dark smudge that hadn't been there before. I zoomed in, but couldn't make out any details. Heart pounding, I moved to the next photo. The smudge was closer now, more defined. It looked almost like a figure, standing among the trees at the edge of the frame. But that was impossible. I had been alone up here. I was sure of it. With growing dread, I continued through the sequence. In each successive shot, the figure drew nearer. It was unmistakable now. A human shape, but something about its proportions seemed off. Too tall, too thin, its limbs at odd angles. My breath came in short gasps as I reached the final few photos. The figure was no longer in the background. It dominated the frame, rushing towards a camera. Towards me, its features were a blur of motion, but I could make out eyes, wide and feral, and a mouth open in what looked like a silent scream. The last photo made my blood run cold. The face filled the entire frame, so close I could see every detail. Pale, almost translucent skin stretched tight over impossible cheekbones. Eyes that were too large, too dark, boring into me with an intensity that made me feel naked, exposed. And that mouth, open far wider than any human mouth should be able to, revealing row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. I dropped the camera, stumbling backward. My foot caught on a root, and I fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I lay there for a moment, gasping, my mind reeling. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. I had been alone up here. I was certain of it. Wasn't I? A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond my headlamp's beam. I scrambled to my feet, panic overriding every other thought. I had to get out of here. Now. I snatched up my fallen camera and shoved it into my pack, not even bothering to zip it closed. The trail stretched out before me, a ribbon of pale dirt in my headlamp's glow. I ran. The descent was a blur of terror and adrenaline. I stumbled and slid, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. But I didn't slow down, couldn't slow down, because all the while, I could hear something crashing through the underbrush behind me, always just out of sight, always gaining. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that frantic flight down the mountain. My lungs burned, my legs trembled with exhaustion, but still I pushed on. It wasn't until I burst out of the tree line and into the campground that I finally allowed myself to stop. I doubled over, hands on my knees, gulping in great lungfuls of air. The campground was quiet, most of its occupants already tucked into their tents for the night. My van stood where I had left it, a solid, comforting presence in the sea of my panic. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I forced myself to turn and look back up the trail. The forest loomed dark and silent. There was no sign of pursuit, no evidence of the terror that had chased me down the mountain. Had it all been in my imagination? With shaking hands, I dug my camera out of my pack. I had to know, had to see those photos again in the light of reason and safety. But when I switched it on, my heart sank. The display was cracked, likely from my fall or the rough descent. It flickered weakly, then went dark. I slumped against the side of my van, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. Of course the evidence would be lost. Who would believe me now? As I climbed into my van and locked the doors, I knew two things with absolute certainty. One, I would never set foot on Eagle's Peak again. And two, The next time I reviewed my photos, it wouldn't be until I was far, far away from any forest. The wilderness had always been my sanctuary, my source of inspiration and peace. But now, as I started the engine and peeled out of the campground, I realized it had become something else entirely, a place of shadows and secrets, where things lurked just beyond the edge of perception. I drove through the night, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that mountain. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between the trees, something was watching, waiting, and smiling with too many teeth. The first crack of thunder shook the entire cliff face, sending vibrations through the rock and into my very bones. I clung to my precarious handhold, my heart racing as I watched my climbing rope fray before my eyes. Trapped halfway up a sheer wall with a storm rolling in and our only lifeline disintegrating. This was about as bad as it could get. The day had started with such promise. My climbing partner, Alex, and I had been planning this ascent for months. The north face of Mount Erebus was legendary in climbing circles, a challenging route that had claimed more than a few lives over the years. But we were confident in our abilities, perhaps too confident as it turned out. We'd set out at dawn, the crisp mountain air filling our lungs as we began the approach hike. The weather forecast had promised clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect climbing conditions. As we walked, Alex and I bantered back and forth, our excitement palpable. "You ready for this, Jamie?" Alex grinned, adjusting the straps on his pack. "It's going to be one for the books." I nodded, returning his smile. "Born ready. We've trained for this. We've got this." The base of the cliff loomed before us, a vertical expanse of gray stone stretching up into the clouds. We took a moment to double-check our gear, harnesses secure, carabiners locked, ropes coiled and ready. With a deep breath and a nod to each other, we began our ascent. The first few hours were exhilarating. We moved in perfect sync, finding holds and setting anchors with practiced ease. The exposure was intense. Nothing but air beneath our feet for hundreds of meters, but it only added to the rush. This was why we climbed, for moments like these. We were about halfway up when I first noticed a change in the air. A sudden gust of wind whipped around the cliff face, unusually strong for what should have been a calm day. I looked up, squinting against the glare of the sun. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, moving fast. "Alex," I called out, gesturing upward. "You see that?" He paused in his climbing, following my gaze. A frown creased his forehead. "That's not supposed to be there." The forecast said clear all day. I felt a knot of unease form in my stomach. Mountain weather was notoriously unpredictable, but this was a drastic shift. "Maybe it'll pass us by," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We pressed on, our pace quickening slightly. The wind continued to pick up, bringing with it a noticeable drop in temperature. I shivered, glad for the extra layer I'd packed just in case. We were traversing a particularly exposed section when the first rumble of thunder reached us. It was distant, but unmistakable. Alex and I exchanged a look of concern. "We should think about heading down," he said, voicing what we were both thinking. I nodded, already scanning for the best route back. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Our rope, our lifeline, was rubbing against a sharp edge of rock with each gust of wind, and it was starting to fray. "Alex," I said, my voice tight with fear. "The rope. Look at the rope." His eyes widened as he saw what I was seeing. "Shit," he muttered. "Okay, don't panic. We can fix this. We just need to." His words were drowned out by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm was no longer in the distance. It was right on top of us. Rain began to fall, fat drops that quickly turned into a deluge. The rock face, previously offering decent grip, became treacherously slick. We were in serious trouble, and we both knew it. Climbing down in these conditions would be suicide, but staying put wasn't much better. The rope continued to fray with each gust of wind, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. "We need to find shelter," Alex shouted over the howling wind. "There's got to be a ledge or an overhang somewhere." I nodded, blinking rain out of my eyes as I scanned the cliff face. About 20 meters to our left, I spotted a dark recess in the rock. It wasn't much, but it might offer some protection from the worst of the storm. "There!" I pointed. "Think we can make it?" Alex looked where I was pointing, then back at our fraying rope. "We don't have much choice." "On belay." "Belay on," I confirmed, bracing myself. Alex began to inch his way across the rock face. Every movement was agonizingly slow, each handhold tested thoroughly before committing. I fed out the rope carefully, acutely aware of how little margin for error we had. A blinding flash of lightning illuminated the entire cliff, followed almost immediately by a boom of thunder that I felt in my chest. I flinched involuntarily, my foot slipping on the wet rock. For one heart-stopping moment, I was falling. Then the rope went taut, jerking me to a stop. "Jamie," Alex's voice was barely audible over the storm. "You okay?" I took a shaky breath, willing my racing heart to slow. "Yeah," I called back. "I'm okay. Keep going." Alex resumed his careful traverse. I watched, muscles tense, ready to arrest any fall. But he made it, disappearing into the recess in the rock face. A moment later, I felt 3 sharp tugs on the rope, the signal that he was safe and anchored. Now it was my turn. I unclipped from my current anchor, saying a silent prayer that our fraying rope would hold for just a bit longer. Then I began to move. Every inch was a battle against the elements. The wind buffeted me, threatening to tear me from the cliff face. Rain pelted my face, making it hard to see. My fingers, numb with cold, struggled to find purchase on the slippery rock. I was about halfway to the shelter when it happened. A particularly strong gust of wind slammed into me, pushing me against the sharp edge where our rope had been fraying. I heard a sickening snap, and suddenly there was no tension on my harness. The rope had broken. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the frayed end of the rope whip past my face. I felt my body beginning to peel away from the rock. In that moment, I was certain it was over. This was how I would die. But some deep-rooted survival instinct kicked in. As I began to fall, my hand shot out, grasping wildly for anything to hold on to. By some miracle, my fingers found a small crack in the rock. Pain shot through my arm as I jerked to a stop, but I held on. "Jamie," Alex's anguished cry reached me over the storm. "Hold on. I'm coming for you." I couldn't respond. Every ounce of my strength and focus was devoted to maintaining my grip on that tiny crack. My feet scrabbled against the rock, trying to find some purchase. Rain and sweat stung my eyes. My muscles screamed in protest. I'm not sure how long I hung there. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. I was aware of Alex moving towards me, agonizingly slowly. He couldn't risk a mistake now. If he fell too, we were both done for. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, I felt Alex's hand grasp my harness. "I've got you," he said, his voice strained with effort. "Can you move?" Somehow, I managed to nod. With Alex providing an anchor, I was able to get my feet back on the rock. Inch by excruciating inch, we made our way to the sheltered recess. As soon as we were both inside, we collapsed, gasping for breath. The overhang provided some protection from the rain, but the wind still howled around us. We huddled together for warmth, neither of us speaking for a long time. The enormity of what had just happened, how close we had come to death, was almost too much to process. Finally, Alex broke the silence. "That was too close," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, still not trusting myself to speak. We had been arrogant, overconfident in our abilities and our gear. Mother Nature had reminded us, in no uncertain terms, of our own fragility. As we sat there, waiting for the storm to pass, I found myself reevaluating everything. Why did we climb? Was it worth risking our lives for a moment of triumph on a mountaintop? I had always thought I knew the answer to these questions, but now I wasn't so sure. The storm raged on through the night. We took turns keeping watch, though sleep was impossible anyway. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, the wind finally began to die down. The rain reduced to a light drizzle. We emerged from our shelter, stiff and exhausted. The cliff face, which had seemed so inviting yesterday morning, now looked menacing. Without a word, we both knew our climb was over. It was time to go down. The descent was slow and careful. We used every piece of backup gear we had, taking no chances. When our feet finally touched solid ground, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, relief, gratitude, and a newfound respect for the mountain. As we hiked back to our car, battered and humbled, I knew that this experience would stay with me forever. It had shown me the razor's edge we walk as climbers, the fine line between triumph and tragedy. But it had also shown me the strength of partnership, the will to survive, and the awesome power of nature. I wasn't sure if I would ever climb again, but I knew that whatever I did in life from this point on, I would do it with a new perspective. Because sometimes it takes hanging by your fingertips on the edge of oblivion to truly appreciate the ground beneath your feet.